We're just starting the webinar for today. Thanks for those of you who just joined us a little while ago. My name's Tom Measham. I'm the Research Director at CRC Time, and it's a great pleasure to be here for another of our webinar series, the Dig Deeper webinars, on a Friday afternoon. It's another great lineup of speakers. So I'm just going to say a few words of introduction. In a little while, I'm going to be handing over to Jason Kirby, and then he will be introducing the speakers for today. So just to get us started, point out the title for today's session, Closure Planning Issues and Demonstration Sites, really important key topics for CRC Time. And I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians across all the lands on which we live and work, and pay our respects to elders both past and present. For me, that's the Yagara and Turrbal people, because I'm here in Brisbane. And as you know, CRC Time is spread right across the country. So that's many lands on which we meet today. I will just say a few words to get us started around the process. So we are recording the presentation, and that's very important so people can listen to the presentation afterwards in case they were not able to make the session. We will be using the Q&A feature. So the Q&A feature, if you look on your screen, it's up towards the top right-hand side. If you go over from chat, we go to Q&A. We'd like you to use the Q&A feature rather than the chat feature. The Q&A feature is very well suited to seminars and to webinars. So look, really, I'm going to introduce Jason Kirby, who is the program leader for Program 4. I'm going to hand over to Jason. He will introduce the speakers, and then I'll be coming back at the end of the session to say a few final words. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Tom. You can hear me, can't you? Beautiful.
Loud and clear.
Beautiful. So so my name is Jason Kirby. I'm one of the program leaders for CRC Time. The program I lead is data integration, forecasting, and scale. So that's the program I lead within the CRC, which is a couple of these presentations actually sit within that program, of course. So right from the start, I suppose, instead of me wrapping on, I'll introduce Dr. Elise Bekele, who is a senior research scientist with CSIRO. I'm sorry, Elise, if I actually did a poor go on your surname there. She is a hydrogeologist, like I said, from CSIRO. Elise has over 20 years experience in working with industry and government in applying predictive models for water quality assessment and management, and also with groundwater contamination and also remediation approaches to groundwater contamination, like I said. She works at a local scale, but also at the regional scale as well. And very, very happy to have someone like Elise within the CRC where we're in the direction that we are going. Elise was part of two foundational projects within the CRC. One was towards an inventory of abandoned mine sites in Australia, an inventory of abandoned mines in Australia, risk prioritisation and opportunities that was led by Mining 3. But the project Elise is actually talking about today is a project that she was co-leading with another researcher, Greg Davis, on innovation through demonstration and trial sites within the CRC. So I would like now to actually bring Elise to the stage now and for her presentation on the findings from the project on the demonstration and trial sites. So Elise, over to you, and I hope you can bring your presentation up.
Thank you, Jason. Can everyone hear me okay?
Beautiful. Yes, Elise.
Lovely. Thank you. Australia has thousands of developing, operating, suspended, and abandoned mine sites. Many of these are suitable for showcasing technologies and new approaches to assist transitioning mine sites towards closure and new economies. Today, I am talking about CRC Foundational Project 4.3 led by Dr. Greg Davis. Jason Kirby, who we just talked to, program lead, and Mr. Peter Waters, a mine closure specialist, are also gratefully acknowledged, along with our project advisory group. This is a foundational project because it provides a basis for planning future research projects that match appropriate mine sites to different objectives. see if I can get my presentation to move forward. Yeah, here we go. For this project, we developed a database of potential sites. At the start, we conducted a survey of CRC time participants to clarify preferences about what attributes to showcase. This was to ensure that the sites we prioritized would have value to the participants. Our partners include the CRC, of course, South 32, Alcoa, the Government of South Australia, Rio Tinto, the Northern Territory Government, Mining 3, Hanson Construction, Iluka, and Energy Australia. This project was motivated by a lack of a descriptive catalog of national mine sites available for potential demonstrations of technologies and approaches to aid mine closure and to document past closure activities and post-closure activities. And for these sites, we wanted to demonstrate a range of key issues and challenges. For example, post-closure site ownership, revegetation efforts, and waste rock landforms. And we wanted these sites to be representative of different conditions across Australia. Oftentimes, research is initially conducted in the lab or at a small field scale, but we aim to find mine sites of a suitably larger scale. And we strongly believe that research and innovation need to be demonstrated at the correct scale to encourage adoption, uptake, and use. To gather relevant information and recommendations, several tasks were undertaken. We began with a search of publicly available information on the mine sites, their environmental and community setting, and their condition. A CRC time partner survey was conducted to provide broader views of factors relevant to selection of possible demonstration sites. And we held interviews with 13 mining companies to ascertain the details of the mine sites, their condition, including previous rehabilitation efforts and industry intent around some of these mine sites. And we held interviews with government agencies to ascertain details of mine site closure, issues of concern to them, and to identify approaches to abandoned legacy mine sites. Okay. We identified from these meetings and interviews over 100 mine sites. They were shortlisted based on these interviews with representatives from the mining industry associated with CRC time. So if I click on this interactive legend, you can see those that we discussed with Alcoa, BHP, Energy Australia, Fortescue Metals Group, Hanson Construction, Iluka, MMG, Newmont, Oceana Gold, Oz Minerals, Rio Tinto, Roy Hill, and South 32. And we included discussions, and we identified sites that we call government sites. They are abandoned sites. They're shown here as well. So our report has an appendix, and it contains details for all 105 sites. At an early stage, we included those from New Zealand, but the main body of our report focuses on 20 Australian sites in detail. And the next few slides will provide background on the attributes considered in trying to prioritize the sites. And these slides are available for you to download from the CRC. And when you view them in slide mode, they allow you to access more information via hyperlinks to data sets for each of the mine sites. Shown here are the geologic provinces and resources at these sites. And in order of, so there were a wide range of resource types, and they're sorted here on the number of sites. So we had over 25 of the sites being iron ore, some that were coal, some that were gold, copper, mineral sands, zinc. I could keep on clicking, but it'll get pretty busy. And you can interact with this legend and click them on and off at your leisure to see the different mining resources that were represented by these sites. We also categorized them by their mining type. So some of them are open cut, some are underground, strip, or a combination of underground and open cut or strip. And we also categorized the sites as to whether they were abandoned, those that were closed, and those that were operating. The survey that we conducted showed that there was interest in a range of priority challenges that relate to mine features, and these are listed here. There was a majority or a preference for these topics, such as waste rock dumps, final voids, tailings and pond facilities, potential acid-forming materials, final landforms, landform reshaping, revegetation, water management, community preferences, and transitions to post-mining economic benefits. So we categorized the 100 and so sites according to these features. Yeah, I can click on these the interactive legend, so you can see those that had tailings storage facilities, those that have acid mine drainage issues, those with voids, pits, and/or ponds, waste rock dumps, rehabilitation efforts underway or planned or past efforts that are well documented in the report, landform design, water issues, and community links. So I've shown you these maps of sites distributed by features to convey that we had a great base to start from, and I really have to thank our Jason Kirby and Peter Waters for holding those initial interviews, but we wanted to narrow it down to 20 priority sites to feature in our report. As I said, these slides are available to you so you can obtain this information. These are the 20 sites, and I'm just going to read them off. We have Woodcutter's Mine, Rum Jungle, Weepia Operations in the north, Norwich Park, Ottery Mine, Junction Reef, Dendrobium Mine, Prominent Hill, Brakunga Mine, Yallourn Mine, Hercules and Roseberry Mines in Tasmania. Up in the northern part of WA, we have Roy Hill Port, Goldsworthy Mine, Nullagine, Yandakujina, Narngaloo, Eneabba Mineral Sands, Gaskell Avenue Sands, Boddington Mine, and Jarradale. Yeah, so if I hover over the place names, you can find out some more details about each of them. For example, Rum Jungle, uranium mine, Weepia has bauxite. And I also included hyperlinks. So if I click on this, it'll tell me a snapshot. There's a template that we followed. So each of the sites has this information provided. So for Weepia, it's a bauxite mine. It gives the mining type, when it commenced, when it closed, its location, climate information, aerial extent, and some of the key features of the footprint, such as extensive shallow open pit excavations, transport hubs, and revegetated regions. Also, we included information about key issues and interests at each of the sites, post-closure opportunities, and of course, the site owner. So if you obtain these slides, you can gather a lot more information about the different mines. And if at a glance you want to know how close they are to regional centers or urban areas, for example, Prominent Hill is quite remote. It's about 650 kilometers northeast of Adelaide. But if you're looking for a site that's close to an urban center, for example, Eneabba Sand is about 280 kilometers north of Perth. But you get the idea. So you can explore these slides and find out more details. We also gathered information about the climate. So I've summarized this here. If you hover over the sites, it shows you a brief description of its climate, hot summer Mediterranean climate, for example, at Narngaloo, with an average rainfall of 345 millimeters. But in contrast, or in comparison, you could look down here in Tasmania. Hercules Mine has something on the order of 2,800 millimeters of rainfall, average annual, with a temperate oceanic climate. Listed here are a few dot points of where we can learn more from mine site trials that are either underway in the past or the companies are seeking partnerships to conduct trials. So again, this information was gathered from our interviews. In some cases, we went and had repeat interviews with the mining companies, and they were very kind to provide us access to this information. I'll just run through a few of the examples. So if you were looking for trials of waste rock dump erodibility, you might look at Boddington Mine. Brakunga Mine is a good one for looking at acid and metalliferous issues, the formation, the treatment, the mitigation. That's not to say that there aren't other sites. There are, and they're documented in our report. But as I mentioned, you can pull out these different ideas to look at opportunities for reuse of underground workings for water storage and pumped hydro power. Dendrobium Mine is a good one to look at. Yeah, for showcasing the consultative process, for example, funding provided by Newmont to stakeholders to develop business cases for economic post-mining land use options for different domains. That was Woodcutter's Mine is a good example. So our key deliverable is the report, which we refer to as a catalog, or the database, which is an Excel spreadsheet to accompany it, as well as these slides, which are rather handy for clicking on the sites and seeing them spatially. So we provide a broad range of mine sites have been identified and described that offer potential for demonstrations in the CRC time project. Some are operational open, some are closed. We have included abandoned sites and quarries. We've tried to cover all states and the Northern Territory, some near urban, some are regional, and we've tried to include a range of climate conditions, different types of rocks, rock types and geologies, and different types of resources from quarry to iron ore. And our report provides the key challenges at these sites and potential future focus areas and projects that are outlined there. Potential research areas are broad, as I've discussed. They cover things like waste rock dumps, final voids, tailings, and pond facilities, potential acid-forming materials, final landforms, revegetation, landform reshaping, water management, community preferences, and transitions to post-mining economic benefits. So how can industry use these findings? The catalog of demonstration sites provides a means for subsequent focused conversations to fit new or existing technologies and approaches to possible candidate sites and issues for further upscaling and demonstration. The innovators in the CRC have a direct pathway to work with partners to present and demonstrate the benefits and value of technologies and solutions for faster uptake and adoption and improved closure outcomes. And if I could touch on our 6 key stakeholders, regional development and indigenous groups, they might find our work useful to help identify nearby sites that have gone through closure. State government agencies, they might find our findings useful to identify sites from the other jurisdictions with similar characteristics. Research organizations for faster selection of case studies. The mining companies and supply chain or METS companies, they might find it useful for identifying who to speak to and what to learn from sites that are further along the closure process with similar characteristics. The implications. It's important that knowledge, technologies, and solutions emerging from the CRC research programs are scalable, market-ready, and field transferable. New projects and initiatives in CRC time show the importance of research translation through partner demonstrations and case study sites. And I'm going to outline a few examples. Dr. Sarah Harmer is a project leader for a study commenced in March 2022. She's from Flinders University. She's undertaking a study on improved prediction, remediation, and closure of acid and neutral metalliferous drainage sites by examination of mine waste behavior at the mesoscale. It involves management of waste materials from multiple sites of interest in Australia, USA, Canada, and Malaysia, covering a range of climate conditions. Another study is Dr. Susan Prober. She's a project lead for one that's going to start in July. And it's a study on the evidence for effectiveness of climate-adapted seed sourcing strategies for revegetation success and transition to mine closure in a changing climate. And the study selection sites are going to involve mines in WA, Northern Territories, Queensland, South Australia, and Tasmania. And the last example listed here is an initiative by the CRC time on National Mine Pit Water Lake Water. CRC time National Mine Pit Lake Water Assessment and Management Initiative. It's risk prioritization and regional opportunities, multiple model systems and mine site and regional case settings across Australia with a number of project proponents. To finish off, I hope that I provided you with an overview of Foundational Project 4.3 that describes a database we prepared with support from our partners. The work is provided in a final report, and the title is A National Network of Demonstration and Testing Sites, Scaling Mine Closure Technology and Approaches to Mine Site Scale. Thank you.
Thanks, Elise. That was brilliant. I love the interactive the slides and that you've actually presented, and that database is now sitting on the CRC time website. Yes. As well, isn't it?
Yes, you can access it by clicking on this particular link. if I should be so bold, it's opened up in my other window. Yeah, there you go. So there you can access it. There's the final report. If you scroll down to the bottom, the project outputs, which includes this Excel spreadsheet and the slides from the forum we did in November, to pretty much the same set of slides. Yeah.
Thanks, Elise. You might want to just drop out of presentation mode as well, but that was fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And really, the project really came out around the idea that we wanted to make sure that the outcomes from programs within CRC had a pathway for uptake and translation. So this project was really the start of that, and it was really that having that conversation with our partners around how we could do that more efficiently. And the start of that is really getting an understanding of the sites that we could access across the CRC partner group to do that. So if you've got any questions for Elise, the Q&A section is there, or in the chat section. I'm looking at both, but any questions now would be highly appreciated. But I'll start off, Elise, right from the start. Is you selected 20 sites to go into more detail, and I know you went into that a little bit, but can you just give us a bit more of a breakdown of how those sites were selected, and for the categories that you chose to actually make those 20 selections across Australia as priority sites that we might want to focus on for projects moving forward?
Yes, it was very much an iterative process involving Dr. Greg Davis. In fact, I created little, as you call it, baseball cards in a way, a little summary cards. I had them all laid out on the table, trying to place them. We knew we wanted to have a good representation across Australia. We didn't want to have everything in WA where I'm located, and we wanted to have the different mineral resource types, not have everything being iron ore. There certainly was a great abundance. And that's, again, an artifact of the interviews that were held at the very start that gave us that first about 100, that 100 set of sites to begin with. So it's very iterative. And then holding the discussions with the mining companies, they told us which sites were of interest and had very, they were far along in some of the projects and really seemed like worthwhile to include. So I think that's pretty much it. Also, of course, the different topics. We wanted to make sure we covered a range, and I had these all in a matrix in Excel, so we could see, how many of them tick the box for, let's say, acid water issues or waste rock dump erodibility trials, and we didn't want to have all of them in one bucket. So from that, again, I had them all laid out on little tiny cards, so I could read them all. If you can imagine 100 sites, and then we just kept moving them around and trying to sort it. But it was hard to assign a rank or to prioritize, and that was some of the wording in the initial proposal, that we're going to prioritize the sites.
Yeah. But in the end, we've got a catalogue of different sites across Australia with different issues that people can actually access to see if they've got technologies or innovation or solutions that might be able to address at those sites, which they might want to work with their partners in a kind of design way in developing projects moving forward.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest contributions from my point of view is probably the outcome from all the interviews. Just having those one-on-one discussions and emails back and forth. Is it acceptable to use this figure or this map of a particular site? It's cutting through all that so that now you can just pick up the report and see which of the sites are publicly available. Some of this information just wasn't for different reasons. So now, you can get your hands on it pretty quick and get the information you need.
Beautiful. Danielle's got a question. Is it planned to add further sites to this register?
I haven't been funded to do additional work in this area. In fact, it's quite a step outside. As you mentioned, my background's in hydrogeology, and I was asked to help with this project. It's my first foray into mining projects. So maybe, I'm not sure.
So following from that then, Elise, where would you like to see this go forward? Or what would be the next logical step for moving this forward as a better resource that people actually use to allow that translation of our technologies and into the real settings of mine sites?
Oh, that is a good question.
I'm sorry to throw you under the bus on that one, but
I think yes, more discussions about it. Possibly just like these webinars, talking to more folks about what they'd like to see in the future. I don't really know how this will go forward. Yeah.
Oh,
I have my keen interest in water. Anything related to water and groundwater, mine. Yeah, I'd be very keen to get involved myself. That's my bias.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I'll just check the chat quickly just to make sure no one's jumped in there. So It's a nice question saying very happy. Sorry, someone got a question online or?
Yeah, Jason, there is a question from Thomas in the Q&A feature.
Go for it, mate. You can read it.
Yeah, does the study cover all mine sites undergoing mine closure of the participating mining companies, or is it a subselection?
Let me see if I can read it. Does the study cover all mine sites undergoing mine closure? No, I'd say that it was definitely a subset. Yeah, what they're willing to divulge. There's only so much time in a particular interview, and they prioritized and only told us about certain ones. I mean, in some cases, I did background reading about the different mine sites, and at the interviews, I'd say, "Oh, what about such and such?" And oh, well, that one's just not further along. We'd rather talk about this. So it's not as comprehensive as all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Brenda's just saying very happy to have Hansen sites as potential project sites, and that's why we went into this project. It was very much around trying to link with our partners around sites and opportunities of trials and demonstrations to have a pathway to impact. So that's where the CRC is a little bit different, I think, in the sense that we're not just going to make things and do things. We want to make sure they're translatable and being able to be used either by government or industry. So very happy to continue the conversation around project and demonstration and trial sites. So I'll let you go there, Elise, and move on to Isaac now. But
okay,
really, our conversations within CRC around projects is very much around looking for opportunities to case study or trial or demonstrate, and we will keep pushing that language forward. So thanks, Elise. I'll move into Isaac.
Okay.
Isaac, you can probably bring up your presentation just to make sure it works, and you can do that now. So Dr. Isaac, Dr. Isaac Dzakpata, I think I said that right, hopefully, is a mining engineer and also a work area leader in integrated mine planning and methods at Mining 3. He has over 2 decades of industry experience in developing technologies and modelling their value for future mining systems and applications. Isaac is presenting today some of the work that he did in a foundational project as the project leader, of course, titled Exploring Mine Closure Planning Issues. And there, I've read your title for you, mate. I'll bring you to the stage now, Isaac. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm hoping that you can hear me.
Yes, go for it.
Right. Yeah. So straight into the slide deck. You can see my screen. So I was quite lucky, and we had a very good mix of people to work on the project. Myself, Mohammed, Brian, and Mehmet Kizil. That last name should be Mehmet Kizil. On the right side, you see the partners. Of course, CRC Time Mining 3, Oz Minerals, Newmont, and the others listed here. We've chosen not to mention other names. So I'll try and get through the problem that we were trying to investigate, methodologies that we applied, some key findings, and impacts and implications for industry. And then we can do some Q&A session. By way of summary, so the intent was really to understand the important mine closure planning issues or challenges that existed. But once we started looking at time constraints and the scope, we quickly realized we had to focus on just a couple of the stakeholders. So we focused the interaction between mine operators and regulators. And so we went through a critical literature review, and then we applied a methodology that we thought was quite suitable for the particular challenge. And then we went through a process of interviewing various stakeholders, including industry practitioners. And then we came up with up to 25 key issues that we think were worthy of further investigation in other future research. So, like I said, the intent was really understand what is the disconnect between the mine closure planning as an intent versus what you have as outcomes. Indeed, we do plan to have a very beautiful post-mine closure outcome when we start mining. We submit plans and all of that, but the real task of planning, I guess, for the post-mining closure alternatives, it's quite a challenge because you have a lot of changing parameters to deal with. including the fact that the mining process itself changes over time. The deposit knowledge and uncertainties around that also changes. The mine ownership itself changes, regulatory requirements change, and the stakeholders you're dealing with change. For instance, over a 50-year mine life. And of course, the evidence supporting various mechanisms or strategies that we've implemented also change over time as we learn more about their impact out there. So like I said, we did literature review, industry consultations, as well as a desktop review of some of those things that we found. I present here two approaches that we saw as very helpful. One perspective is to look at it from a SIPOC, which is more from a business improvement kind of angle, where you decompose the elements of the process, if you call it that, into its component elements, and then understand who does what, who provides what, and who gets what. And then the other angle from which we saw this was more of a communication system, where there is a content that is provided or a document that is generated, and that information is relayed to someone amidst all these issues around the noise and confusion and the changes that we talked about. And once the end user gets that information, it's up to them to decide what to do with it, whether they provide feedback or not. So by combining these two approaches, we came up with pretty much what you could match across the two, and we called it a hybrid, a complex adaptive system, which is actually what it is. Because of the changes that take place over the life of mine, this is a complex process, and it's not a very simple one to just diagnose and say this or that is the problem. So let's start from the stakeholder point of view, the disconnect that we found. Like I said, the encircled area is where we did focus, and we looked at the stakeholders as internal versus external. So the internal stakeholders tend to be the ones that are generating the mine closure plan, and the external stakeholders, more in the environment, are people who tend to be end users or people who make contributions, but are not quite involved in the nitty-gritty of the mine closure planning process. But what we quickly found was that, at least from the environment side of things, social demography changes a lot over time, over the life of a mine. You're talking 60 to 70 years of various kinds of mines. And the prior mining experience of that locality really plays into the understanding of what they want and what they do not want. And finally, the source of information that guides the mine closure planning process tends to be quite critical to the outcomes that you get. One, I guess, light bulb moment for us as a working team is the fact that majority of our stakeholders are accepting of the venture. And once those people are accepting of the venture, there could be minority groups that are not quite considered in the process in terms of inputs and how their inputs count regarding the overall mine closure plan. So that turns out to be a couple of the disconnects we found. Now, when we come to the inputs, so I'm just dealing with the SIPOC component now, and we find that quickly you could break the mine closure planning into a number of stages, and it's the planning that happens before the life of the mine. There's some kind of planning that happens as you begin to progressively rehabilitate or deal with the issues that you presume will be there. And then as you get towards the end of the life of mine, where the impact is quite significant, you can now see where this is going. And then finally, there is a lot of, well, some planning that still happens once the mine is closed, but it's in care and maintenance, and you still got to keep planning activities that have to be done. And we find that there seem to be a lot of insufficient levels of input from some stakeholders at the beginning, and that sort of tapers down as the mine develops. But these groups are quite different. Now, the regulatory pressures can vary along these stages. So at the early stage where you want the mine to be up and running, the pressures are quite different. And then when you begin to get to the end of the life of mine, where the impacts are quite visible, the pressures are also very different. And of course, as you get to the end of the life of mine, the pressures are not just coming from state and regulatory authorities, but also coming from community stakeholders that are very different from those who made contributions to the mine closure plan when you started mining. So I guess some of these need to be taken into account as we look at mine closure planning, and that also turned out to be, I guess, a group of disconnects we found. Now, when we get to the process itself, there is this notion of one size fits all that is expected, I guess, through regulatory requirements. But the truth is that if you look at the varied issues that are of concern when you're planning, you're dealing with different mine life cycles, you're dealing with very different mining methods, you're dealing with very different commodities, as well as different levels of confidence around a project. And so you can't simply just apply a simple method to every one of them and hope that it resolves the issues. So I think that's one of the key issues found in this process. The other one, which relates very much to the slide before, was that a method chosen at the early stage of a mine may not well apply once you begin to discover some more information about the deposit or about the mining process and what potentially could happen to various materials that are moved from the in-situ location to stockpiles and dumps. So understanding those risks across the various stages, and the fact that the plan we start with will very well change over time. But then how do you track this plan over time? Because you have changing stakeholder inputs, changing knowledge about the mining process itself and the deposit, as well as the effect of the ambient environment, as well as changing climate on what you have already mined that are on stockpiles. So from a process point of view, there are indeed a couple of disconnects. Now we come to the outputs. So we talk about SIPO, and that's the O I'm talking about now. Now, if you look at the very detail of the outputs that are generated, there's a sense that there is one plan that is made at the beginning, and this plan is updated over time. But what we found through the process of this project is the fact that there are different requirements that form, the components of what you call a mine closure plan. And these change over time and are quite varied over these 4 stages that we identified. So there isn't one document, and this became very apparent quite early, that you will not be able to find one document that carries traces of all the changes you've made over time and the learnings that come out of that, in order to guide how you continue to build this document. So I guess what I'm saying is that there isn't a living document. Most of them are deterministic and quite fine print documents, and you update certain portions of them, but over time you can easily lose track of what has been changing over time. For instance, you may start with a certain extent of a surface open pit mine, but then gradually, as the commodity prices change, stakeholder involvement changes, you could end up with 3-4 times the size of this excavation, and yet the impact, you can't seem to track those changes in mine plan in the one document. So I guess in conclusion, there are some disconnects when it comes to the outputs that are generated as well. because you don't have a holistic view of what you plan to do, what you end up with, and what the changes have been over a long time, especially when the mine life is quite long. For example, over a 50-year life of mine, the expectations is that you do have this one document again, like I said, but then the variables change dramatically over time. And we've talked about some of that already. So probably leave a lot of that to the question time if there are any. So this we found to be also a disconnect. Now, the final part of the puzzle, which is the end user or customer, is that while the mine closure plan is generated predominantly by the mine operator, you couldn't really reach out to find one particular custodian of this one or expectation of mine closure. And you would have to go to multiple locations to find different pieces of this mine closure plan that is meant to guide what the mine should look like. Of course, you would find a very detailed mine closure plan which the mine operator carries, but that is predominantly for approval for the mine to retain its license to operate. So I guess that is the challenge on the other side. Once all of this, so how do you then feedback from the end user back to the one who's generating the plan over time? And remember, this mine ownership could change 3 times over its life. So there are challenges as well on the end user side. We quickly found. So I just want to provide a quick summary then of some of the key findings that we have. From the regulator side of things, there are knowledge gaps, obviously, in terms of understanding and I guess providing sign-off for what the mine operator presents. Even though there are guidelines, they have no way to, I guess, check that a novel idea or novel approach to mine closure will be better off, of course, but the mine wants to put forward its best view of what they would like to do when the mine comes to a close. From the mine operator point of view, there appears to be a lot more disconnects around the integration of the processes that they have. And this came out quite a number of times as we spoke to the various experts within the mine operator side of things. And then the final part, which is more of a joint action, is that a knowledge-based system that is able to capture this changing phases as well as changing parameters and all that is involved in the mine closure planning across various operations, various commodities, various sites would be very, very useful in guiding what we learn and how we implement, providing evidence for methods that have been implemented in the past. So I guess from an implication for these 6 colleges of stakeholders, again, we did not really touch on all the stakeholders, obviously, because of the constraints of the project. But it was quite clear that one of the things, which is an outcome of the project, a risk-based approach to assessing various parameters around mine closure planning would be helpful because it does integrate everything together. And then the same process allows us to move towards a knowledge-based approach, which would help very much with decision-making around, especially from the mine operator point of view, decision-making around what the evidence has been over time, what has changed over time, and what the regulatory framework, which is also changing over time, is at one time to be able to guide the process of closure planning. So I'm hoping that I've been able to convey some of those outcomes in very clear language to you. But we did provide a report, which is on our website, CRC Time website. And the key findings, I listed a couple of them. We have 25 odd issues that were identified using the methodology of source, input, output, and receiver approach. And yeah, so you're open to questions. I think that's all I've got in the time allowed.
Thanks, Isaac. Any questions? Bit of an echo in the back. Please, if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A section. So, Isaac, I'll start off quickly. But so you talked about the approach at the end based on risk. Is there also an approach where you can look at the benefits and value from closure as well?
Yes, absolutely. I guess the other thing we found, which is more in the stakeholder space, is that what is of value to one group of stakeholders at the beginning may not quite be of value to the other stakeholder at the end, where the impact is more visible. So this concept of value itself is not quite a straightforward description. And it needs to be able, it's possible that we can look at value very differently, but we need to be able to count that right from the beginning and bring other parties that would benefit then from whatever you're calling value to participate much earlier in the assessment period. Because obviously the mine is there to make profit, primarily, of course, in a safe and profitable way, but the main objective is to be profitable through the venture that they go through. There are other people who may like an eco-friendly outcome, but they should be involved in the process of planning that right from the start.
Thanks, Jose. You can drop your presentation now, mate, as well. Thank you. And Ray, I think you got your hand up. I don't know if you can actually speak, but if you've got a question to ask, you can ask it if you can speak. Maybe his hand wasn't meant to be up.
I think that's just a question. Any thoughts about
how manage changing standards? There you go. So there's one by Oscar. So any thoughts on how to manage changing standards, regulatory requirements over time?
Yeah, and that's what we're talking to regarding the knowledge-based system. What we found, if you were to go online to look for what are the regulatory requirements for, first of all, they are different by states. There's not a single standard that applies across the whole nation, but then it's hard to find and get through all the legal content. So a knowledge-based system where you could quickly go in and look for AMD standards and then find there's 6 of them. There's one there, there's one in the state, and the most recent one is that, and not that you're referring to 5 years ago, which is not up to date. I think it will be a very good start to capture the changes in the various regulatory requirements over time. So I think that's what we propose, a knowledge-based approach to keeping track of not just the mine planning inputs, but also the requirements.
Thanks, Isaac. So if you've got another 5 minutes or so. So if you have any questions for either Elise or for Isaac now, please just put them in the Q&A. There was one more question for you, Elise, before we went out. So did Elise include remaining metal content in tails, which I think is a very good question.
Yes, and I provided an answer.
Yep.
I could just read it off. Actually, the Q&A, isn't it? So no, we didn't tabulate it in a sense that we weren't as very comprehensive. There might be mention of sites where this is of interest. Ray has had a hand up for a while. I think he's not on mute anymore. Yeah. Has that disappeared?
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah.
Okay, no.
So, any more questions from anybody on the two presentations? I just want to. The reason I was bringing that question up again, Elise, is because it's been raised a few times within the CRC that about waste, and it's not the best word, but the value from tailings or waste on site. So to me, that would be a very nice addition to that demonstration and trial database, or whatever we want to refer to it as. But really, it's about finding projects that fit into that circular economy kind of a process that the CRC is definitely enthusiastic to be involved with. So getting that information and adding it so people can come up with innovation around that would be very, very beneficial to the CRC and our partners, I would say.
Okay.
So I don't see any more questions coming through. So unless, Tom, I'm missing something and it's just not showing up in mine, I might just...
I see. Oscar's got
Oh,
one for both Elise and Isaac. How comprehensively did you feel your final data sets are? I.e., did they encapsulate all the issues out there? Certainly, we had to draw the line at some point, and this is a study. The one that I conducted was heavily based on information that is not necessarily in the public record. It depended on whether the companies are willing to share it. So certainly, it would have been nice to write a tome on each of the sites, but certainly wasn't made available to us. So possibly not as comprehensive. And it was just an exploratory sense. You could take this information, go back to the companies and say, well, what did you mean by that? Has it changed? I mean, the information is subject to change. They certainly might have some legal reason not to make a particular site accessible in the future. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt. And Isaac, did you want to answer too?
Yeah, I think I side with a lot of the comments you just made. I think one of the biggest challenges is that there's a lot of information out there, but they all have their own peculiar perspectives. It's not the general. So I think this is the first step in trying to put together something that is a bit well-rounded, but it's still, again, the scratch of the surface. It's not really deep enough. Like you see, we just looked at interaction between two groups within the 6 stakeholder college. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we might end it there, unless I don't see any other questions or desperate, but I suppose this is only the start of the conversation. The reports are available on the CRC Time website. Elise and Isaac are definitely easily contactable by their emails, and I'm sure that's available once again through the reports on the CRC Time website. This to me is just the start of the conversation. So if you feel like there's something in this area that you would like to progress the conversation with our partners in the CRC, please contact Elise and Isaac. And I just want to once again thank you, Elise and Isaac, for the presentations and the hard work in a foundational year within the CRC. So really appreciate the hard effort it's taken to try and pull the information out that you've had to do and give us a direction moving forward. So thank you very much. And I'll probably pass on. Well, I won't probably. I will now pass back to you, Tom. So to wrap it up.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks so much, Elise and Isaac. Really fabulous presentations, and I really like the interactivity in particular. I really like that, and great graphics and just great all-round information. I just put something in the chat there that the next webinar is going to be on the 24th of June, and I will also mention we have a survey that we do for feedback. So if you have some feedback about the seminar or about the webinar, we very much welcome that feedback. And it's all part of a learning experience and just constantly looking for improvements as we do with everything with CRC Time, looking for ways to do things better. So that feedback is really, really helpful. It's been fabulous. It's such a diverse range of important research, and today we just had we dug a bit deeper into those two presentations, which were both excellent, and we look forward to hearing people and seeing people at the next webinar. So thank you very much, and hope you all have a good weekend.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.